So when we look at this picture and then we look at how Americans see it and how they are responding to it, the Times have just done the last couple of days 2 big polls that seem pretty legit. And essentially, Biden is doing terribly. I think it's, what is he, 39 or 40% general approval?
39 was the approval number there.
Well, you've just described an economy whose policies are relatively consistent with the previous administration that have led to considerable success in many areas, certainly sellable politically. Factories are very sellable politically. Infrastructure is very sellable politically. High employment rates are very sellable politically. But most people seem to not be that impressed with them. There's slight improvements in understanding of how the economy is, but most people are not impressed. Biden is not a popular president. He's historically extremely unpopular at this point in time in his term. In a head-to-head with Trump, it's basically tied.
Yeah, it is a tie in the Times poll.
Yeah. So why does Biden get no credit? This is the big political question.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that inflation has been a large and very real problem. And until recent months, it was combined with negative real wage growth. So people were going out there and they were saying everything at the store is more expensive, or at least many of the key things I buy are more expensive. And the growth in my paycheck is not keeping up with that. And so they had good reason to be upset. And even if it's a trade-off between inflation and employment, inflation affects everybody. Employment, most people would still be employed even if the job market was much more slack. And so I don't think a lot of people walk out of their house in the morning and say, if not for Joe Biden, I would not be employed today. And for most of them, that's not true. They would still be employed under a different set of economic circumstances. Whereas they look out and they say things have gotten more expensive. There are some good reasons to blame that on the government, and then also the government and the incumbent political leadership of the government tends to get blamed for that, whether or not they're really responsible. So I think that's at the top of the list. People have good reasons to complain. I don't want to suggest that the public is simply deluded about the economy. I do think that it would be good if members of the public looked more at the global comparisons and saw that these problems are global in nature. The problems are very real, but I don't think that they can be ascribed as much as people tend to think to the faults of one specific government. And the problems are, they are a little bit in part about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Democrats like to talk about that, but there are a number of other factors, including hangovers still from COVID, and the Biden administration's overstimulation of the economy is one of the key factors that drove inflation. So I think that's answer number one, is that this has been a weak point for the administration. They're getting punished for it. I think secondly, Biden has never had a base of super enthusiastic fans. He's acceptable to a lot of people, but he never had the sort of cult of personality that Trump had or that Obama had. He doesn't inspire the Democratic base in the way that another politician could. And there have been political upsides to that for him. He's being less of a polarizing figure. Doesn't just mean that you excite your base more. It also means it doesn't mean you excite your base less. You also excite the other base less. And that can come out ahead for you politically. But I think that's a reason that his numbers can get soft like that. One thing I would note is that in 2020, Biden won a clear majority of voters who disliked both him and Donald Trump. And so that can make Biden's numbers look weaker than they actually are. He is likelier than some other politicians to pick up the votes of people who don't approve of what he's doing. And similarly, Democrats did quite well in the midterms among poll respondents who said that they somewhat disapproved of Joe Biden's performance. So I think part of that is people to his left who tell pollsters they don't approve of him because they wish he would do something more liberal, but they are likely to come home and vote for him anyway when election time comes around. And some of that is just people who are dissatisfied with our politics from wherever they sit on the political spectrum and who wish that the candidates were someone other than Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I think a lot of those people, just like they did in 2020, will come to the conclusion that Donald Trump is unacceptable and therefore they have to vote for Joe Biden.
Except this poll,
even though they don't care for him that much.
The Times poll did drill down on that, as I read, which it looked at those voters that didn't like either, which neither were running. Yeah. And among those voters, it was pretty even. I think Biden had a tiny little edge over Trump, but so that's not a big lead in the way that he had. It was even.
It was even, but the poll was also 43-43, which means that you have a lot of voters who are up for grabs there, and those undecided voters are likelier to be people who are unhappy with either candidate. So I think part of it I think is likely to be the case, that some of those voters just haven't come home yet in the polls.